Emma, how are you? It's been so long.
It has, hasn't it? It feels like it's been about 20 years, but I think that's probably pandemic time. It's
It's
hard to
it's
tell,
more like
isn't it?
six, I think. But I wanted to talk to you today because one, it's about time we caught up anyway, and also we want to mention first off. I wanted to mention that you've got a new Kindle ebook out of Planetfall stories.
Yes,
Right.
yes, I
Okay.
have, yeah.
Yeah, which is called Before.After.Alone.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Would you like me to tell you about it a little bit?
Yeah. We're trying to avoid spoilers. So what I want to do is cover the series because I think a lot of my audience will not have read your work and I think they love it. So, but we'll talk about the new one for now because that would be a nice little supplement for them if you see what I mean. So, get
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
so basically, during the pandemic, I wrote 10 short stories of varying lengths,
Hmm.
and just wrote them for my newsletter subscribers and Patreons. And I thought, actually, they've just been sitting on my computer gathering dust. Why don't I see if I can learn how to do this self-publishing business?
Yeah.
Because it's small enough and self-contained enough to be a manageable project whilst learning a completely new skill set.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I did it myself, and I didn't do the cover because that is absolutely not within
Yeah.
my skill set. But luckily, I have a very talented bestie
Right.
who did that for me. But yeah, the 10 short stories, there are only two, I think, that have got spoilers for people who haven't read the books,
Okay.
and
Right.
that's signaled within the book itself. Like just before the story, I
Right.
do warn
Oh, okay.
people,
Right. Okay.
um,
Good
and they're
stuff. Well,
designed
yeah.
they're designed to kind of flesh out some of the backgrounds of some of the characters in the novels.
Hmm.
Some of them are just to give a taste of what life was like way before the novels. So
Right.
like
Okay.
little gaps, extras,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was a very steep learning curve.
Right, okay. But
um,
a bit of a sort of like extra world building exercise then for
oh, that was the easy bit. It was the
all right.
self-publishing that was the the steep learning curve.
It's that tech stuff that we hate. But
Yeah.
we'll come back to that a bit later on, but to talk again, I mean, you know what I'm like. I find very little contemporary SF that meets my exacting criteria of literary quality and innovation. I don't find much that really grabs me because I'm an old guy and I've been there and done that, what have you, and I most complain about these things. But Planetfall, as you know, and here's my nice little rock edition, of course, which I bought many years
Oh.
ago. Do you know when I never got you to sign these to me, which is a real fail. So I have to send you some book plates or something. I don't know how that
Yeah.
happened. I don't know how that
Oh.
happened because I'm usually very rigorous about that. That's first, sign my books first. But it was one of those things where this really sort of blew me away, and it really worked for me. And I want to kind of set the scene for the series for the viewers. And I'm not big on series either, and my sort of viewers know this. And I'm always saying, oh, singletons are the way to go to get really good SF. But um, what I liked a lot about one of the many things I liked about Planetfall and its companions is that they form a kind of mosaic novel. So it's like a shared background, but at different times and places within a certain time frame. So it's like a medium-term future history. It doesn't have that sort of manifest destiny Heinlein thing. It is around certain events which happen in the Planetfall universe. And what sort of sparked that as an approach for you? Was it what came first? Was it the general idea of the social and technical situation, or what came first with Planetfall?
Well, first it was the protagonist in Planetfall,
Yeah,
and
Renata.
yeah, and with Ren, I'm always reluctant to talk exactly the details of her mental illness, but she has a very severe mental illness, which
Yeah,
I like people to experience in the book
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I made very firm decisions about what is revealed when.
Yeah, I want to say
Um,
that for me was such a big thing. I found that so wonderful. And we'll come back to that without the spoilers. So I'll let you continue. But I just wanted to say there that that was something that, as much as I like all aspects of the book, that particularly really blew me away because it's something
oh,
I'd only
thank
seen
you.
once before. But anyway, I'll let you turn to the background.
Well, I wanted to write about somebody with that mental illness for
Mm,
decades, and I just hadn't found the right setting, the right story, the right character.
Mm.
And when I completed the Split World series, the first 3 novels at that point, I wanted to go into sci-fi. I felt I was ready, and it was really nerve-wracking because sci-fi has always been my first love. I
Yeah.
discovered it when I was 9 years old.
Mm.
It is absolutely the most important genre to me, and yet my first published works were
Yeah.
urban fantasy, just completely randomly. That's
Well,
a
I
whole
think
different
it
story.
works that way sometimes, doesn't it? It's whatever
Yeah.
you can write at the time, and it seems to be the thing that you start with. It's whatever's right in your evolution as a writer is
And
the
I think
thing.
also what kind of setting the story requires.
Mm.
I didn't sit down thinking, I am going to write an urban fantasy today. I wrote a
Yeah.
series of short stories and a novel, and then was told by the publisher who wanted to publish it, this is urban fantasy. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
blimey, that's news to me. I've never read any urban fantasy. What is this genre? Because I'd only ever read sci-fi.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm
yeah,
going
it
to be
was
flashing up all the
strange.
covers on the screen for everybody to see. So
Oh,
because
lovely.
they're still out there, so everybody
So
will go out there. So
the first 3 novels of that series were done, and at the time, even though I knew it was a 5-book series, I only had 3 that had been bought,
mm.
and it finished enough. There weren't any massive cliffhangers, but
Yeah.
I was dissatisfied. But I thought, okay, the best way to cope with this is to write something else. And I saw an article that was talking about the possibility of colonizing the moon by using moon dust to print the structures. So all you need to do is get 3D printers to the moon, and then you can make your
Yeah.
base.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I love 3D printing. And this was back in 2013
Yeah.
when I was starting to incubate this. So good grief, that's 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's hard to
And
believe, isn't it? It's one thing that got me about the 3D printing thing was that it is tech which exists, and obviously it's going to evolve, and we know it's going to become more important. And other people have used it, but you made it sort of central to the narrative. So one of the great
yeah,
things to me about Planetfall was that you didn't just have this amazing backdrop, which we'll go into, but you also had this particular issue you wanted to write about with Renata, the central character, and also the tech as well. So it's the great thing about Planetfall is it's very sophisticated on a number of levels. And the thing which really got me was that with the series you've got with Planetfall, the first book, we're set on a colony planet, and then in the immediate, we're not going to call it a sequel because they can be read in different orders, can't they? There's at least 2 reading
absolutely.
orders. And I know you say this on your website, but I thought about this as well before I even looked at that bit of your website, actually. And then with the second book, After Atlas, this is set in England on Earth, in a fairly mundane setting, and a lot of the events in this are unknown to the characters and the whole milieu of this. Then we've got Before Mars, which is obviously set on Mars largely, and then there's Atlas.Alone, which is set on board a spacecraft. So you've got all these different dramatic scenarios, and there's 1 or 2 overlapping characters who research later on. But
Yeah.
it was the fact that you had all that stuff in there, and really, just to talk about this one, what I would say, if somebody said to me, how do you describe it? I'd say, well, the bare plot, it's about a religious leader who inspires people to follow them on a colonization mission to another planet. And, that's an interesting idea because people say, well, why would you have religion in science fiction? It's not science. And
Yeah.
yes, it's a recurrent theme, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's an interesting one. So to flesh out the basic scenario and the background condition or that the world is in at the time that Planetfall and the other books are set, can you sort of flesh out the scenario a bit more? Because I could do it, but you do it better because you wrote it and you'll probably be more eloquent than me.
Oh, I don't know if that necessarily follows, but
I think you do.
sometimes it's hard talking about your own stuff. But I think I have enough distance now.
Yeah.
So yes, as you said, somebody has a very strange religious experience, wakes up from a 3-month coma with coordinates saying, we need to go to these coordinates. This is where we are going to find God.
Mm.
And has such a force of will and force of personality and rapidly developing genius that she manages to inspire thousands of people to work together to build a spacecraft that will take them to this place. But that's all backstory.
Yes, yeah.
The story is actually set on the planet
Mm.
about 20 years after they arrived, but you find out everything that's happened in that intervening period throughout the narrative. And it's very focused on Ren And Ren, the reason I brought up the 3D printing was because she is the person who is the top 3D printing engineer
Yeah.
who's in the crew.
She's always going
And
to the masher and recycling stuff, isn't she?
yes, yeah. And what I wanted to explore with the technology in Planetfall is a way to do, I guess, ethical. I don't think you can have ethical colonization. To have an ethical expedition to
Mm,
a planet which does not damage the environment,
mm.
which isn't about extracting resources or oppressing anybody that's there. As far
Mm.
as they know, there is nobody else on this planet at all.
No,
There is just
no.
this strange alien structure, which is exactly where the effectively prophet said that it would be, and they set up their colony there, and it's about what happened in the intervening period. Everything is established, and then one day, out of the
Yeah.
wilderness, a new person arrives, a human being, and everyone's like, there aren't supposed to be any other people on this
Where
planet.
did
What is
he
this
come
about?
from?
Yeah.
So
And so
again,
it's,
I think all this again with what we said already, suddenly reveals a lot of the reasons why I liked it so much, because there was all this stuff going on, and it wasn't just the fact that you got the Gordian knot plotting and you weaved everything in, and the characterization is there. You know, it's got the big alien artifact. It ticks all the boxes, and I think anybody who likes really traditional SF, or anybody who's come into it from, you know, as you say, like sci-fi, from the sort of mass media. And I remember you and I talking about, you were a big fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation when you were young. I remember us
yeah,
talking about that.
yes.
And and me being a bit older, of course, it was for me, it was the first sort of series, the
Yeah,
first time around when I was really little. But you know, you brought all that stuff in, and coming back to the sort of mental health thing, and the one thing I loved about that, and of course these days we have lots of buzzwords, don't we? And I remember, I'm sure we're both still angry about Donald Trump. I remember when you came along,
yes.
when you came along with Gavin, came to my shop,
Yes,
and
yes, I
there was a
do.
lot. We talked a lot about Donald Trump. Remember, I've actually
Yep.
put the video of that up on the channel, so I'll send you a link so you can
Oh,
see.
wow.
Gavin's a great guy because he sent me the video, so I'm able to put that up there. But it was the way where, you know, mental health, it's bandied around a lot these days. But the thing that got me was that this wasn't like a sort of hand-wringing issue for you. This was something very serious. And what struck me about the specific illness that you covered was that it's an illness which is very common. It's
Mm.
almost mundane. We see it on television, and yet we're still shocked by it when we see it, even though it's quite common. And, you know, I think a lot of us, you know, have aspects of it. You're looking around me, you're probably thinking that a bit now. But it's one of those things where it's the sort of thing that should come up in good science fiction, but so often doesn't. People bring their expectations about what SF is, that it's mere escapism or entertainment, when of course it's a great venue for things from the real world, and it's always been that.
Absolutely.
And I
And
think,
that was
go on, sorry.
uh, so that was one of the things that I was very keen to explore and consciously chose to write about in Planetfall, because when I was between the ages of 9 and 18, I imagine, all I read was classic SF, like Golden Age SF.
Yeah, yeah,
And I adore and still have a special place in my heart for so much of what I read then. But when I've gone back to revisit it later, it's like the concepts are fabulous in so many of these things,
yeah,
but the characterization
yeah,
is less evolved, it's less developed. These characters are
absolutely. Yeah,
often vehicles to explore the concepts. And that, I'm not saying that that's bad, I'm just saying that those are choices that are made by writers about what they want to focus on.
yeah, very much so. Yeah,
When I was thinking about writing the kind of science fiction that I wanted to write, whilst feeling actually, you know, viscerally terrified of writing in the genre that was so important to me, one of the things I was thinking was, actually, I want to have awesome tech. I want to explore that intersection between technology and humanity, because that for me is what makes science fiction so fascinating.
yeah,
But I also want to explore mental illness. I want to explore the impact of that on interpersonal relationships in a similar way as the impact of technology
yeah,
on
absolutely. Yeah,
relationships.
I think
And
that
it was important to me.
the thing that really struck me, and I might have mentioned this to you before when we did a bookshop interview, was that with Planetfall, with the use and the way that you handle the approach to that particular illness, I'd only really seen it in the work of one other writer, and that was Philip K. Dick. And it reminded me of a small section of a book called Clans of the Alphane Moon. And it was brilliant to see something so mundane and yet so shocking and so real world take place in a venue like this. And that's what made this more than just great science fiction. It made it great fiction per se.
Oh,
And
thank you.
you managed to, well, you did a brilliant job. And as I said to you before, I think you and Nina Allen are my two favorite contemporary British SF writers on the female side of things, and I think you do
Thank you.
a great job. And I know you know Nina's work, and she's a great lady. She's a friend of mine as well, as you know. But it was that thing where you brought the real world concerns of a social novel, and very relevant ones, and to show that they would work in a scenario like this, that it doesn't just have to be the representational thing of this is about a colony on an alien planet. These are real people and these are real issues. And it was fantastic. And it's, obviously we're going to avoid the spoilers, but another thing which really got me was there's also, to add to all the other elements, I'm just going to move my notes a minute, so forgive the rustling of paper.
Don't worry.
I like your
Have a quick cup of tea.
you have the tea. I know you're a big tea fan.
I am.
Yeah, I know about your tea thing, but it was very much that what got me was all this was there, and that revelation came about what was really happening with Renata, and that was fantastic. That was the sort of thing I look for in terms of a conceptual breakthrough, not just at the beginning when the whole situation is established, but midway through the book, and then another one at the end. And I think that's what makes a great SF. And in that way, I'd compare your book to Brian Aldiss' Non-Stop, where he does a couple of quantum punches near the end, where he reveals something, he reveals something else. And it's not just a gimmick, it's a really important thing for good SF. And I think there's that enigmatic climax, which just kept me thinking. And again, what I loved about your book was, I think the few negative reviews you see online are people who bring in their expectations of what science fiction should be, when of course what we know is that science fiction isn't about expectations, it's about upsetting them and seeing what you can do to change the world. And so the one question I wanted to ask was, were you sort of critiquing religion in general or cultism specifically? Because obviously there's a cult leader in this. Was that part of the agenda as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always wary of saying that I had an agenda to attack something, because I think that isn't necessarily a good place that writing should come from for me personally. No. I am not religious in any sense.
No, same here.
And but I am utterly fascinated by the power that religion has over people, and that can be used for both amazing, beautiful things, but also can be used as a means of control and domination and
very much so.
Horrible things. Just like anything within the sphere of human experience, you can have good things and bad things with the same root. And so one of the things that I did specifically want to explore was whether it would be possible to write pretty hard SF with characters who are also religious, because in most of the stuff that you encounter, in particular in modern media, they are very separate. You don't often see something where it isn't, where it's not the most important thing about the characters. The book isn't about religion. It is just that the protagonist and all of the other people there, were moved to do something, but it wasn't like a traditional Christianity religion. It's one woman saying this is where God is. It's a neo-religion potentially, but there's also very little dogma. There's very little ritual. It's a scientific group, and I was really fascinated in the interplay between those things, of people who could design a spaceship, get there, adapt their physical biomes to a new environment so that it doesn't poison them and kill them instantly, and yet at the same time be going there to find God. And I found that in my own mind paradoxical, because I'm not a person of faith, but I thought, well, there must surely be lots of people who, and I know that there are lots of scientists who also are people of faith.
Absolutely.
And I think
in SF we and there's a lot of examples of this where it's deemed to be an entirely secular thing, but there are great examples from the past. The obvious one from the past is James Blish's Case of Conscience, And that's a book which has got a probably a bigger following now than it's had for years because people are discovering it new. And your book also reminded me of a more obscure book, only in a small way, but I think you'd find it interesting. A book called The Night of Kadar by Gary Kilworth, which was
Okay.
Gary's second novel from I think the early 70s, and that's about a Islamic seeding colony starship, and it's a very, very beautiful book. And I really recommend. I can do something on the channel about that, but it's a lot simpler than your book, and it's more straightforward. But it's got some great stuff in it. But I'll send you the title.
Thank you.
Just
Yes.
to remind you, you can get it secondhand easily, and it's probably a Kindle ebook as well on Gateway from Gollancz, of all people, and or maybe Faber. It's great. But then moving on. Then, after blowing me away, you did it again with After Hours, which is the which is the second in the sequence chronologically in terms of publication. But you
Yeah,
could read it as the first, and I love
absolutely.
this because I mean I am very, very big on near future SF, and I'm very, very big on things set in Britain. I'm a bit of a sort of not a patriot that way, but I do love stuff which is very English, even though I'm Welsh. It's very much my thing, and
Hmm.
the characters in this don't have the full knowledge of what's happening with the Planetfall events. And this has got a great murder mystery in it. There's a very harsh dystopian background, which I think you handled brilliantly. And I really felt for Carlos, the central character in this, the investigator.
Yeah.
And, your dystopian background that you put in this shows a real social conscience and also a level of realism in the way that is oppressive in small ways to people. It was very Orwellian, and I thought that was brilliant. And, really what I'd like you to do, because again, you wrote it and you can probably be more eloquent than me, is if you can describe the sort of dystopian situation that Earth is in at the point of this story and what's Carlos's status in it, because I thought that was really
Yeah.
quite something as well.
So it's set, if memory serves, 80 years in the future from now, and it's set, I think, 40 years after the ship that is the focus of Planetfall left Earth, and the protagonist Carlos is the son of one of the colonists that you meet briefly in Planetfall. And so the beginning of his life story is abandonment because both of his parents applied to become part of the Atlas crew.
Mm.
The father didn't get in, the mother did. And she made the choice to leave her baby and her husband behind to go on the mission. And as a result, the husband had a nervous breakdown. And that is the beginning of Carlos's life. So he comes from a fundamental tragedy in his life, a personal one. And the world of the future, I saw very much as a logical extrapolation of the present day, unfettered late stage capitalism.
Yeah,
And basically, the corporations have engineered things so that they have consciously bankrupted states
yeah.
so that they can swoop in and effectively take over. So
Mm.
everything is like extreme, extreme neoliberalism to the nth degree, and it is
It's
my
very
personal
Donald
hell.
Trump. Yeah, it's,
Yeah,
it's
I
very
mean
Donald
that
Trump.
came
Yeah.
out
Mm.
the day that he became president,
Right.
and I I wrote that book
Yeah.
actually inspired by something called the TTIP,
Mm.
which was the Transatlantic Trade and International. Oh, I can't remember the exact acronym, but it was basically being discussed at the time as a way to give corporations effectively more rights to sue governments for resources because everyone knows how great Nestle has been with
Oh yeah.
responsible use of water resources, for example, and many other places all over the world. They are already doing appalling things, and one of the aspects of the TTIP was about giving them more power to sue governments
Mm.
for access to those resources.
Mm.
And when I read about that, I thought, oh my goodness, that is absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
And I had no intention of writing any other books in the Planetfall universe. I wrote Planetfall as a standalone, that was it. And then it really took off. And but when they bought the book, they said, we want two books from you, and we
Yeah.
want them in the same
Take.
universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once Planetfall was done and dusted, I was thinking, oh, what am I going to write? What am I going to write? And I didn't want to write a direct sequel.
No. No.
And so what I thought about was, well, what happened to the people left behind? Because it was a huge resources, physical resources, and also brain drain of all of the people that went with Atlas. So I thought, okay, these are the two major influences on that world. That's why it's ultra dystopian. With Carlos, he's what they call an SDCI, which is a special detective chief inspector
Mm.
for the Ministry of Justice. But what I wanted to examine in this book was somebody who has, from the outside looking in, a huge amount of social power. He
Mm.
can walk in anywhere, he can conduct an investigation, everyone has to answer his questions, do what he says.
Mm.
But he is actually an indentured slave.
Yeah, he's not
And
powerful as an individual, is
he's not.
he?
No,
It was
he
the
has
aspect of the
zero.
slavery which really got me. And
Yeah.
it's very easy to sort of have this thing with the classic. I mean, again, you brought crime fiction elements in. And, I'm always saying to people, well, crime science fiction is often crimes in the future. Crime plot elements are common in SF, and they always have been.
Yep. Yep.
But so they would think there was the locked room thing comes into it, that
Yep.
motif and the police procedural approach. But it was, and you did both with great facility, but at the same time, there was that dual status where he, is investigating this case. He can do what he likes up to a point, but the guy is so oppressed by his social
Yep.
status and debt and the fact that he is an indentured slave, which I thought was again a
Yeah.
sort of that I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's something which really would lead people in. And there was
Yeah, it's very
yeah,
early on you find that out.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was very
And it's,
Orwellian, again, very real world. It felt really real to me, I must
oh,
say.
I'm so glad. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the other aims of that book was that I set a challenge to myself of creating a locked room murder mystery police procedural, but set 80 years in the future, where all of the traditional points in crime where there is a built-in pause, where they're waiting for a genetic test result or they're waiting for forensics,
Yeah.
and that can be used to build tension about when another murder is going to happen or whatever,
Yes.
that is gone,
Yeah.
that those
Absolutely.
tools are removed. And I wanted to see if I could find a way to maintain the tension and the mystery when you have what seems to be all of the information available to solve the crime. And it was a very, very fun challenge. It
Yeah,
was hard at
I
points, but
think
very
I think you
fun.
did a great job. I mean, I've read a lot
Thank
of
you.
crime fiction, and obviously there's the tech stuff, like he's got a virtual personal assistant, and I thought that, I mean, it's been a commonplace for a long time now for people to
Yeah, there are
their
loads of things
feed.
in there that are not original.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's you sort of did that really well. A lot of the time it feels tacked on, but that was really part of the plot as well. And it's it was very, very much the two together. And these are the ones I want to talk about the most because we don't want to give too much away. And the way that the religious quest that Atlas goes on, if I can get trying to watch myself in the mirror, as it were, and, you know, which leads to the which is contributory to the factors in this. And then later on, we go on to Before Mars, which, as it implies, is sort of mostly set on Mars about an artist who is working for somebody very rich. And we see this thing about power a lot and capitalist power in Europe, which is really good. And
Yeah.
something, there's one line in After Atlas which I keep quoting it all the time, and
Oh.
I must quote it. It happens at least probably once a fortnight, and I quote it a lot in work because you deal with tech, and one of the things about tech is that there's always compromises. There's brilliant technology out there, like that, then flashing up, you're running out of time in 10 minutes or what have you. There's always these things which are inefficient or annoying.
Yeah.
And I often say this to my customers with, when the sort of till suddenly crashes or something mundane like that. And the line in the book where, and I think it's a moment when Carlos is opening a door or something, and you write, with convenience, something was lost. And it's
Oh,
about
yes.
technological convenience. It makes some things easier, but you lose things. And I think that's so true. And that's the sort of dark side of science fiction, the business of the future being dangerous by default. And the clickability of social media and all this sort of stuff. And I think that's such a wise thing, to write.
Well,
So I'm
thank
very
you.
envious of your talent in encapsulating such a big thing that in fact affects our real lives and the lives of characters in SF novels, particularly, in such a great way. So I say that all the time. With convenience, something is lost. So
Yeah, there's a lot of my personal rage that went into these novels, and
yeah,
rage about the way that things have been going since the 80s. And a
yeah,
lot of that, you were talking about the social conscience and the examination of power, and a
mm,
lot of my anger about you know, the widening, ever widening gap between haves and have-nots, you know, the 1% and everybody else, and how utterly disgusting and
Yeah,
infuriating I find it. It was really, I wouldn't say fully cathartic, but there was an element of catharsis in being able
yeah.
to explore that in these novels, especially in Atlas Alone, which is
Absolutely, yeah.
very
The
much
fourth
about that.
novel, yeah, which is the one set in the spacecraft, and the thing
Yeah,
is the situation in that I could feel obviously the characters that in a very interesting situation, which we won't go into that, but I could feel the tension and the tightness of it, and it felt. In as much as these, you know, this book is pretty dystopian, I felt very much in Atlas Alone that, you know, the situation they were in and the way it was tightened up was, it was like wire cutting into your flesh. It was really quite something in the fourth
thank
book.
you.
So we're not going to talk too much about those. We want people to read them. But sum up, what I thought was great was these, all this serious stuff is in there, but the books are also very entertaining. So for somebody who wants all the traditional elements that they expect in an SF novel or series, where there's space travel, an alien world, there's alien artifacts, enigmas, there's high tech stuff of different kinds. There's different planetary venues. There really is something for everybody. And the mosaic way, the way that they overlap, and if people look on your website, you propose 2 reading orders. So do have a look at Emma's website, everybody, because there's 2 reading orders. And I was looking at that earlier on. I was thinking, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So you can, I mean, one thing I'll say briefly is that you can enter this way first. But I think I got a lot more to this by going here first, but you could do either. So it's great. So they work the singletons very, very well, because the knowledge of what happens in Planetfall isn't sort of there for the people in After Atlas. And because when you're
Yep.
reading it after Planetfall, you're thinking, wow, all this other stuff has gone on and people don't know about it. And yeah, it's
Yep.
stuff. So for people who already read your stuff, there's the new collection of short stories, which is on
Yes.
Kindle.
It's on all
All
platforms.
platforms. So no matter
So
what sort of
it's,
e-reader you got, you're okay. Good.
yeah, and it's ebook and audiobook formats.
Marvelous. Yeah. Are you
And
still
I
doing this?
narrated it.
Yeah, because you used to do
Yeah,
a lot of audio narration.
I still do. I'm
Yeah,
actually
I
in the
thought you
studio
did.
tomorrow.
Yeah, well, you've got
Yeah.
such a good speaking voice, you know,
Oh,
that's the
thank you.
thing, you
I
know.
haven't warmed up either. I should have been
Well,
doing
you
all
don't have to
silly
warm up
voice
for me.
exercises.
We just chat away. So, and obviously, there's your other work as well. Now, I will confess, I've not read any of your fantasy work, but I should really read sort of Between Two Thorns, as it's set in Bath, of course.
It
And when it
is.
came out, where I work, we had a little table full of it. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is set in Bath. And I remembered when I tried to write a science fiction novel set in Bath back in the 80s, which was terrible because I was nowhere near ready. And I thought it was great to see that somebody's done one. And it went Zoom and sold out and kept selling. And I thought, well, you know, I forgot to get a copy. And as I say, what I'll do,
Oh,
I'll send you some book plates so I can get them to these. I've got the
oh,
others
thank
number
you.
as well because
And all 5 are out now. All
they,
5 of the Split
yeah,
Worlds story. They're with
they're
another publisher, and all 5 are done. So the series is complete. I know that people worry about getting invested in something that's not complete, but it is complete. So
well, you know, that's good to know because there is this thing where if you're like Stephen King or Raymond Feist or something, things not Stephen King's different, he's mostly singletons, but something like Raymond Feist, where it goes on and on and on, and people say, I want to wait till it's finished. And I say to them, if you keep buying them, they'll keep writing the same thing. So
yeah.
just good to know it's finished. But that's great to see you've sort of done the self-publishing because of course these days, you know, the short story, I mean, more and more, I mean, you look at what gets nominated for awards and it's all very political and stuff and what have you, and sort of centered around, you know, a relatively small number of people in the readership, things like the Hugos and that really. But a lot of it is online now, isn't it? Like Tor.com and things, you know, it's become
Yes.
it's just we are in a science fiction world where it's no longer print magazines and stuff. It's that way.
Yeah,
So
we
it's good.
are.
Yeah.
There are some fantastic publications that still produce like
Yeah.
Interzone, you
Yeah.
know.
Still going. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
a thousand blessings upon Interzone and
Absolutely.
Uncanny Magazine, and
Where would we
yeah,
be without it? This is the thing, isn't it? So obviously
exactly.
it's great to talk. And you know,
And you.
we hopefully it'll be a while. It won't be so long before I see you again. And thanks for talking to us today. And I just really wanted to give you a chance to get across because I could talk about these on my channel, and I have a bit, but it's better coming from your mouth because and I just wanted the opportunity again to say how much I enjoyed these books, and I'm terribly hard to please, as I say, and I thought they were fantastic and good.
Thank you.
and I look forward to whatever you're cooking up next. I'm not,
Utopian.
yeah. So
I'm going for a utopian
are
next.
you really got now?
Yeah.
That's a real challenge. Are you
Yeah, that is a real challenge. I
Yeah.
like setting myself challenges, but yeah, I'm writing a genuine utopian and it is
Okay.
incredibly challenging.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, I'm going to nip off the recording now, then we'll have a little chat between us afterwards. Thanks very much again. Thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for watching, and go out there and buy Emma's books because, as I say, they're great and you love them. There's something for everybody. Thanks a lot for that, Emma. So I'm going
Thank
to stop
you.
this now, and then you and I can just have a chat. So there we go.
Great.